We're recording. All right.
Yeah. So welcome everyone. I think maybe a couple more people can maybe join later on, but I think this is most of us are here. So hi, welcome to our first online meeting for the Image Biomarker Standardization Initiative. So this is the schedule for today. I will have a very short introduction first, and then Vincent will provide a short overview of convolution and filtering. Martin will discuss tests and phantoms, and perhaps the most important thing is what Phil will present is how to measure consensus and some of the results we have so far. And then there's time for open discussion for the remainder of the hour. So hope you all have a pleasant meeting. And I'll start here. So, as you all know, we provide reference values for features in our work, which has been published in Radiology earlier this year. So the question is, would it be necessary to standardize filters as well? So this is from a comparison by our friends in Zurich and Maastricht. Here they basically compared two radiologic software packages using the same image data. And what they found is somewhat a reproducibility even without standardization for shape, intensity, texture features, but for when it comes to wavelet, which is a particular kind of filter, convolutional filter, then that basically drops to zero, the reproducibility drops to zero. And what we hope to achieve in IBSI 2 is basically this, to bring it up to 100%, so to make it reproducible. So again, this work is divided similarly to IBSI 1 in distinct phases. So in the first phase, just technical validation. Here we don't do anything with feature extraction or image processing aside from computing filters using phantom data sets. Then we will have phase 2, where we will try to establish reference values for a subset of features. This will involve image processing, will involve the entire pipeline, and he will focus mostly on statistical features because otherwise the submission sizes get a little bit big and complicated. This eases the workload. And in phase 3, we'll again validate whether what we did leads to an increase in reproducibility. So one thing which I will discuss shortly before we hand it over to Vincent is when image filtering is conducted. So image filters are something we use to highlight things like edges or smoothness or linear structures in the image. And we basically have two options. We can do this before interpolation or after interpolation. And in the end, as you may have seen from documentation, we decided that this should be done after interpolation because the size of filter kernels are spatially dependent. So you need to interpolate to the same grid size across the entire data set. Yes, and then the idea is that you compute features from the response maps, which derive from the which you create after filtering. So here I'll stop sharing, and then it's Vincent's turn.
Yeah, share my screen. So you see my screen now?
Mm-hmm. It's visible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Thank you, Alex, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. So I'm Vincent Andreacik, and first of all, this presentation should have been given by Adrien de Pessange, who did a tremendous work for the IBSI 2 phase 1, but he couldn't present today. So I will try to give a quick overview of convolutional filtering for radiomics, and then more details can be found in the reference manual. So we'll start with defining what image filtering is, and particularly why do we use it in radiomics. So this is a figure from Zhang et al. Of a typical radiomics pipeline. So in radiomics, we often refer to groups of features as intensity, shape, texture, and filters. But what we mean by this is, so first we have first-order statistics of the region of interest, which describe the tumor intensity. We have shape features that describe the shape of the tumor. We have second-order statistics of the region of interest, which describe the texture of the tumor, and which are extracted by grade-level matrices. And finally, filters and wavelets. But what do they describe, and what information do they extract? So they extract information on transitions between pixel values, and except when we use constant filters. So they extract texture information in a different way, often more complete than grade-level matrices. And in computer vision, filters are commonly used for analyzing texture images. So we now describe the image filtering pipeline as we define it for radiomics applications in IBSI. So we start with an image f of k and the region of interest m in red. The image is then padded with an appropriate boundary condition so that we can compute the convolution at the boundaries of the image. We then convolve the image with a filter G. Here it is a Gaussian filter, and we obtain a response map H as a result of this convolution. This response map has the same dimension as the input image, and if we want to obtain a feature that characterizes the region of interest, we need to aggregate the response within this region. So we obtain with this aggregation a scalar value. In practice, we apply multiple filters, each resulting in an individual response map and an individual scalar feature after aggregation. So we now describe briefly the boundary conditions for padding the input image. So here we have the input image F, the filter G, and we have 4 boundary conditions and the result of the convolution after padding with these conditions. So first we have padding with a constant value, then padding with the nearest value, we have periodization and mirror padding. They are the most commonly used padding methods. And just keep in mind that most of the time, the region of interest is not located at the boundary of the image, and the filter size is small enough so the boundary condition has no impact on the feature extraction. But if the region of interest is located at the boundary, we generally favor the mirror condition. So we now present the filters that we use in IBSI2. So we consider the most commonly used filters in radiomics, including mean filter, Laplacian of Gaussian, loss kernels, Gabor, wavelets, and Rees. In the reference manual, we also provide guidance on how to set the parameters and how to aggregate the response maps for good radiomics practice. So here we'll just give a quick example of filtering with the Gabor filters. So Gabor filter banks are used for extracting multi-directional and multi-scale texture information. The Gabor filters are the result of a parcellation of the Fourier domain as shown in this image. These are examples of the Gabor filters in the spatial domain with different scales and wavelengths. And this is an example of image filtering with 2 Gabor filters that have different orientations. So the response maps highlight collagen junctions in the input image at different orientations. So now after the convolution, we obtain a response map, which is not directly usable as a feature for radiomics. So we need to aggregate the response values within the region of interest. The most common aggregation functions are the first statistical moments, which are the mean, the variance, the skewness, and kurtosis. So in particular, the mean is a simple computation of mean of the values in the region, and it is very frequently used. But we should use the mean of the energy of the absolute value of the response when using zero mean filters. Because if we just compute the mean of the response of a zero mean filter, it will be 0. So that's it for the pipeline. I will now briefly talk about invariances and important point that I think for the analysis of medical images. So in medical imaging, the acquisition is particular as compared to other applications like natural images. the type of invariances we want from the feature extraction is specific. So first, equivariance to translation is needed, as in most image analysis, to create response maps that indicates where the filter responded. This invariance is inherent to the convolution. This means that when the input is translated, as in this image, the response map is translated the same way. Now, invariance to scaling is generally to avoid, since the pixel spacing has a physical meaning. Scale can be a discriminative property, for example, the size of a lesion. But multi-scale analysis is not the same as scale invariance. It can be very useful to apply filters of different scales for analyzing patterns at different scales. Now, invariance to local rotations is important. I won't go in the details of local and global rotations, but basically with filtering, we want to detect local patterns regardless of their orientation. Like in this example where this T shape appears at multiple locations with different orientations. It is the same requirement here as we have with gray level co-occurrence matrices when we obtain rotation invariance by combining multiple orientations. So this rotation invariance is not inherent to the convolution with a filter unless we use an isotropic filter. But an isotropic filter is not directionally sensitive and the information it can extract is very limited. So to obtain rotation invariance, we can convolve the image with a collection of rotated filters. Here we convolve the input with 4 rotated versions of the same filter. We obtain 4 pseudo rotation equivariant response maps, and we apply a voxel-wise pooling across these response maps to obtain a pseudo rotation invariant response. So that's all for this overview of convolutional filtering. Many more details are available in the reference manual available on arXiv. For example, we have mathematical definitions, for example, of the convolution, of the filters, etc. We talk about separable convolutions that I didn't mention, and we give filtering radiomics in practice, including resampling and discretizations. That's it for my presentation. I will stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vincent. Great presentation. I'll share my screen for the next part. It won't be long. So the next part is about defining or discussing a bit about the test and the phantoms that we use to produce the results for IBSI 2 phase 1. So what Alex has discussed and some things that also Vincent discussed. So since this reference manual is online and it's kind of very well detailed, I'll jump right into it here and discuss quickly about the different tests and what they mean and the implications in here. So we'll focus first on phase 1, right? Which is about, first of all, making sure we're doing filtering correctly. And we'll leave phase 2 for another time. But basically here, to benchmark our filtering operations, we have a series of different phantoms. You probably noticed that they're available online. Sorry, there was a glitch here. You hear me well right now?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry about that. So those phantoms are available online, and as you notice, probably also everything is centralized now on our IBSI website. So from the IBSI website, you have the links to the reference manual, the link to the upload website, and links to other information. So when you're looking for something, I encourage you to go on the IBSI main website. In there, you'll find the links to the phantoms, and the ones that we basically use mainly for this phase are the impulse phantom, the checkerboard phantom, and the sphere phantom. So they're all ISO 64 by 64 by 64 number of voxels, 2 millimeter spacing. Okay, it's important to take that into account. So the intensity range is between 0 and 255. So they're encoded with 8-bit. That's important to take that into account too. But I would say before looking at any of those phantoms, one of the most important phantom is also this orientation 1. an orientation phantom, which has different dimensions, different so voxel dimensions, and different intensities along those dimensions. So just why we created this phantom is to make sure, basically, if I zoom here on this orientation phantom, I'll zoom a little bit. Make sure that, for example, we define, for example, we apply in the different tests a given filter in the x directions for separable filters, x directions, y directions, z directions. So in order to verify that what you think is really the x direction is really the x direction as we have defined it in our phantoms, you can use this orientation to make sure that that your own frame of reference you're working with is aligned with the frame of reference of the phantoms that we have defined. So that's the first phantom to look at before doing the tests. The other ones that we use as of now, as I said, are mainly the impulse phantom, checkerboard, and sphere. Let's look at them here. Impulse phantom basically is just having one point at the center of it, 255 intensity. Basically, that will when you convolve one filter with this phantom, you'll get the filter response itself. So that's a good first way of looking at if your convolution process is right and if you have the right filters, basically. And then after we go on doing tests with a bit more involved phantoms with different types of intensities, with this checkerboard that looks like this and this spherical phantom as of now. So with those phantoms, now we can produce different tests. And I'll go into the description of those tests. And prior to do the test, a couple of points that are important that I highlighted here. As we've discussed, right now in this first phase, we want the whole response map to be submitted online so that we can really pinpoint where spatially the difference may occur. It will help us to converge as a group towards a consensus response maps. So when you perform filtering, make sure to convert those 8-bit phantoms to 32 bits, to at least 32 bits before doing filtering. Make sure to take into account that, and it's that those voxels are 2 millimeter in size, or any millimeter, any physical distance. It could be any physical distance. Right now, it's 2 by 2 by 2 millimeters. This information can be automatically found in the metadata of those nifty phantoms, the metadata of those nifty files. And when you create your response map and you're ready to export them, make sure they're encoded. Make sure again they're encoded with 32-bit floating point precision. And afterwards, you can upload the response map to this great website that the Switzerland team, in particular, Roger Chai, has put together, so that it's easy to first submit, and second, visualize results, and ultimately compare your results with others, and compare with consensus maps, and make sure that we'll have a tool basically to find the differences in a more easy way. So as Phil will show you, there's some type of approach that we've taken to visualize and quantify and find kind of the consensus of all those different maps together, based on an approach based on PCA, principal component analysis. And we're trying to define also a consensus map. So you'll see with Phil's presentation, you can basically see ultimately on the upload website if you're far from consensus or not, and that will help us to iterate and bring most submissions close to the center consensus. So basically, the tests are defined here, and obviously it refers to the different sections in the reference manual for log filters, for loss filters, for wavelet, and so on. First, we ask to start with some simple mean filtering, basically to check, first of all, if the different padding operations are right. That's the main goal here. checking different types of padding. So that's important to check at first, and this could bring and maybe has brought already the discrepancies, and we'll check that, and we'll converge as a group together with these different types of padding. So obviously padding is important. If we think about radiomics, we could, and we have a region of interest, we could say, okay, I'm just going to take some spatial support twice the size of the tumors, and I will not have to basically deal with padding. But in general, we need padding because the tumor or the region of interest could be close to the border of your image in your scan, basically. So padding in general should be done all the time. So then there's those different tests, and just to give you an idea about our way of thinking here, we've always produced those tests with the impulse phantom first, and then repeat basically the test with another phantom. So as I said, basically do first the test with impulse phantom so that you can check the filter response itself, the response of the kernel itself, and visualize your kernel. And then there's the different types of tests more involved with the different phantoms. As Vincent described, some involve rotation and variance, because some of them, for example, log is isotropic, so there's no need of doing rotation and variance. But loss filters or other types of filters may not be, so we do this pseudo rotation and variance approximation where we can apply those filters in different with different rotations of the filters, basically, or the image, to then pool the results together to get some rotation and variance here. So these details are important, described in the reference manual. So many different types of tests for many different types of filters. So we hope that instructions are clear on how to perform those, and if not, this meeting today is all about that. It's about trying to hearing your questions if things are not clear. So we'll get to that at the end. But that's basically what I wanted to tell you to say about the different tests, the different phantoms, and we'll go to the main presentation of today and look at how Phil about the work that Phil has developed, basically to visualize our results as a group and help us converge towards consensus. So you can go now, Phil. I think you can share the screen.
Okay. Is that working?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Martin. So yeah, I'm going to briefly go over the initial results that we've got for the submissions so far. But first, I'm going to briefly discuss the methods that we're using to measure consensus between the different teams and to identify discrepancies. So these are mainly, as Martin mentioned, principal component analysis technique. We're also utilizing a pairwise assessment between each team and the consensus response map. And then we're employing a iterative approach to remove potential teams that are outliers and therefore affecting the validity of the CRM. So after introducing the methods, I'll then go on to discuss the initial submission results. And I've taken them from the 20th of October, so a couple of days ago, downloaded from the website. We'll go over the number of submissions, the strength of consensus so far for the different filter tests. And then again, I'll show a visualization demo of something that we're hoping to include on the website that will help teams to determine discrepancy. So first off, for the methods for measuring consensus, again, essentially we're splitting them into two main types. The first is to assess the variation between all response maps at once. So this is the PCA technique, which I'll discuss. And then the other is to do a pairwise comparison, which involves essentially generating a difference image and then evaluating voxel-wise a passing rate based on some kind of set tolerance. And then from that, we can assess the validity of the consensus response map. And if it isn't valid, we can use the PCA to identify the outliers. So to go through that in a bit more detail for the principal component analysis, essentially, as mentioned, the response maps are all the same size. So they're all 64 by 64 by 64 voxels. And essentially, we can visualize or assume each voxel is a separate dimension, and we can consider each response map is simply a single observation in this very high dimensional space. And then by collecting all of the results, we can utilize the PCA to assess the overall variation and dispersion between the response maps. And we can do this by essentially just visualizing the first two principal components. So the average result is the one that's in the center of this distribution of points. And the idea is to get as close as we can to the centroid. So the advantages here is that it's great for identifying outliers and similar submissions at a first glance. And this improves with the more submissions that we get as well. So I should point out that these are all visualized and available on the website already. So when you make a submission, you can see where your submission lies within these PCA plots for each filter test. So I've just taken filter test 1A1 here. And as an example, there are 9 submissions in total, and 7 of them are all clustered very close together at this point. And we see that there are 2 submissions significantly further away from the centroid, suggesting that there may be some significant difference here. And of course, the idea is to minimize the distance to the centroid as much as possible. Although the potential limitations with utilizing PCA is that it's hard to determine these, if there's subtle differences between many teams. If there's obvious outliers, it's very quick to identify, but if there's subtle differences, it's hard to determine whether that's significant. And then we also cannot use it to identify the cause of deviation. We can just see that there's some kind of difference between the teams. So that's where we're also utilizing a pairwise assessment between each response map and the consensus response map. So essentially pairwise, of course, we're just taking the average result and looking at the difference between each team and the average result. The idea being that the closer each team, the closer each team is to submission, the closer each team is in agreement to the consensus response map, the better. So if all pairwise assessments are within a small tolerance, then the consensus response map would be valid. If that's not the case, then we can consider iterative approaches to remove the consensus response map, which I'll talk about in a second. So in terms of the actual pairwise assessment, essentially what we're doing is looking at the difference between the 2 images and representing this as a kind of percentage, which we normalize by the range. So here's the interesting maths, but essentially what we're doing is for some set tolerance, each voxel is either marked as being within the tolerance or not. So for this particular filter test, for this particular slice, I'm using a tolerance of 1%, and all of the red voxels are indicating these voxels are outside of the tolerance, and the green they are within. We can then look at this passing mask. We can determine a passing rate, so the percentage of voxels that are green versus those that are red. And then we can plot this against varying tolerance. So for a range of tolerances, we can see what the passing rate is. So we can see that for this particular filter test, these are performing very poorly with this cutoff here. Ideally for these plots, essentially what we want to see is that they shoot straight up to 100% as soon as possible. So utilizing both of these techniques, the main idea is to iterate towards consensus when we find that the pairwise agreement between each team and the consensus response map is not strong enough. So to do this, essentially, we select our tolerance, we collect all the response maps, generate a preliminary consensus response map, and perform the PCA. We run the pairwise assessment between each team and the consensus response map. If all of the current teams are within tolerance, that's good, and then we can collect that and the results. But if not, we then utilize the PCA to remove the team that's the furthest away from the consensus. And we essentially iterate through this procedure until either we reach a valid consensus or there's less than 50% of teams, in which case we stop, because in our definition, we're looking for an absolute majority of teams to contribute to the consensus response map for it to be valid. And similar to IBSI 1, we're using the same measures for the strength of consensus as before. So to give an overview of the initial submission results, so this bar chart is essentially all of the submissions visualized in one slide. So we had 9 unique teams submitting results for 136 different response maps in total, spread across 30 different filter tests. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the mean filter tests and the earlier, more trivial ones, I guess, have more contributions, and this is getting less as they get more complex. So obviously this is something we're going to try and improve as we iterate on this process. So to give an overview of all of the results, we find that essentially we have strong consensus for 4 of the response maps. 14 have a moderate consensus, 5 have a weak, and 7 have none. So in the case of none, this is where either 0, 1, or 2 teams have submitted, and when I try to iterate towards a consensus, I find that there's none at all. So these are all definitely room for improvement here. So to briefly give an example, I'll go select a filter test. So for 6A1, essentially here I've visualized the central slice for every team submission on the right, and you can perhaps see qualitatively there are a couple of submissions that look slightly different than the others. And so if we run through the iterative process, first this team is removed. Again, the results are still not within the tolerance that we've set. So then we iterate again, we remove, and then we find that all of these teams are within a tolerance of the consensus response map. So we consider this one to be standardized, or to be the valid consensus result currently. So to give a quick visual demonstration, we also have, or we're trying to develop a tool to implement on the website where we can essentially compare different response maps to a valid consensus response map, so you can see where you potentially differ. So hopefully if we can get this tool sorted, it would be very useful to quickly pinpoint where you might be seeing discrepancy between the different teams. And you can also compare yourself to other teams if you want as well. Okay. Okay, so just to summarize, thanks for the hard work and collaboration with the initial submissions. We aim to increase, obviously, the number of filter tests with stronger or better consensus over the coming weeks and months, but it's an initial good start. So that's me then.
So thank you. I hope you found the results interesting. I mean, there's a lot to discuss here. Mm-hmm. Are there any questions or comments from the group as a whole? If not, there are some things which we will address in the reference manual. So the one which is now an archive is being iterated on. Things we are adding is a better description of the non-separable wavelets. So for the which are used, for example, in test 8, where we use the Simoncelli filter. Description there, which is in the archive document, is not very clear. And we hope to make this a little bit more clear, easier to interpret. Another thing we have found out is when we consider the separable wavelets, for example, in tests 5 and 6, together with rotational invariance, there's a difference. So there's basically 2 ways to achieve this rotational invariance. One is to rotate the image volume themselves, then filter, then rotate the image, the response maps back to the original position. And the other one is to rotate the filters in a way. But these lead to different results. So we are trying to figure out how to address this particular issue.
Actually, it brings different results, I think, for even size filters, right?
Yeah, but all separable wavelets have kernels which are even sized. It could even be a combination of even sized image volume with even sized filter. I'm not quite sure how this interaction works, but yeah, it's noticeable.
Alex, what do you recommend? Rotating the image or rotating the filter? What should we do?
It's a good question. I find rotating the filter a little bit more elegant in a way, but in the end, we should pick the method which leads to the best reproducibility among the teams. So one issue here is that, for example, in MATLAB, there is a standard function which allows you to do stationary, which means undecimated wavelet transformations. And the best way to use this function is to basically rotate the image volume. Whereas, for example, in Python, there's not really such a function. You can use the PyWavelets library to do such a thing, but there you can, it's probably easier to just use the filter itself. You can rotate the filter. You don't have to do all the superfluous rotations in case, for example, you have symmetric wavelet kernel. So this is a topic we're discussing at the moment. We're not sure yet. If there's input from the group, I would like to hear it.
So shall we wait, because we haven't done it yet, because we didn't know whether it was better to rotate the image or the filter, and so we were waiting for clear instructions regarding this aspect. So do you suggest that we just wait so that you come to a conclusion, or what do you suggest?
Martin?
Because there are quite a lot of experience of experiments that require this rotation.
Definitely.
If I may, I suggest that you don't wait. Basically, that you try it out. But I understand that you want to choose one method or the other. Right now, in the reference manual, in the appendix, it's defined in the more elegant way that Alex described, meaning rotating and flipping the filters. That's how it should be normally. I found it in Python and MATLAB easier actually to let sometimes, for example, PyWavelet work, or let the MATLAB library work and rotate the image. It should lead to the same thing normally. It should lead to the same thing, except that, okay, there's these differences that we notice with even size filters, and we'll get to that. But normally, if we fix this problem of the size of the filters that we discovered, both should not matter to me. It's the same thing basically. So I would recommend, if you're able to go to lower level and get the filters out of your implementation, to do the more elegant way and rotate the filters. At first order, if it's difficult to get those filters out, just rotate the image and eventually we'll get to the same results.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I think it was a great start also, all of this. So thanks a lot for the work of everyone here submitting your response maps for October 15. That was great. And as Phil showed, now we have a really great start to initiate this IBSI 2 work. We're getting some experience, I guess, from IBSI 1. So I guess things will go faster now, and it's very nice to see that we're all on board. And obviously, as in IBSI 1, the goal is to iterate together and do these meetings again with those specific questions, because it's all about that. Now we want to converge to some consensus, but for that we have to answer those specific questions. So we hope to do these meetings, answer those questions over time. Every month, perhaps every 2-3 months, we'll do these types of meetings. So that was the first one, but don't be shy to bring your questions at the next meeting. Send us emails, and the goal is to answer those specific questions to converge as a group.
Okay, we have another question for you.
Sure.
It was not clear to us whether l'appellation of Gaussian filter should be performed in 2D or 3D. Could you please clarify that?
Yeah. So in general, unless it is described otherwise, the filters are performed in 3D.
Okay.
But that's something I can check in the documentation and add if necessary.
Yeah, Alex is your
The documentation should be clarified, I think,
Yeah.
because it was, yeah, it was not clear from the documentation. That's why we ask. Actually.
Good.
Of course, all our examples in the reference manual are in 2D because it's easier to visualize, but yeah, we'll clarify that in general. It's all in 3D, yes.
I made a note, so this will be propagated to the documentation.
Thank you.
So,
would you have other comments, perhaps, if not specific questions, other comments about how to improve this whole process, the upload website, the main website, the analysis of results, the method that we've kind of thought of for reaching consensus? If you have any suggestions also about that, it's made for that, for this meeting, to improve our analysis as a group.
No, we wanted just to congratulate you regarding the way it's now possible to visualize our results. So the PCA representation, which is extremely convenient. So it's great that this is online, because that's extremely useful. So that's really a great tool, so that we can see where we are with respect to the others. So that's really great. And yeah, if you can add the second matrix that you will be using, that you just presented, that could be very useful for understanding where the differences come from. So these tools are really helpful, I can tell. We can tell, not me, but.
thank you.
So that's great.
Thanks a lot.
Sorry if I can butt in. I have a question related to that. I haven't tried that yet, comparing my submissions to on the tool you were just talking about. But I wonder, will there be a chance to update your submission if you submit one and you find, oh, it's not close enough, and then you can try to fix it and resubmit? Will that be possible?
Yeah, so the idea is that you can basically add or resubmit your response maps.
Okay, cool. Sounds
so
good.
The old ones will remain in the system, but the results will be updated for using the new one.
Okay.
Maybe,
okay, thanks.
Maybe it's a good opportunity to present you, actually, Roger, who's the master of this upload website, and that can probably confirm what Alex just said. That's basically it.
Yes, maybe I can just give one more detail. So it's true that we keep the whole history of all the submissions. And the idea is that you can also actually check out the graphs or the PCA charts from different dates. So you can kind of go back in time. And the idea is to kind of see actually that things start to converge towards the consensus point. So it's really this, but the idea is really, of course, you can resubmit a new version, an improved version, and then see actually that the PCA chart will be updated always with the latest submission for your team for any given filter configuration.
So, are there any more comments or questions? Otherwise, the plan is the following. So I think in the coming week or 2 weeks, we will try to update the reference manual regarding the points discussed earlier, and also make it clear that we should do it in 3D. We'll upload this, and in the meantime, we can iterate on the tests. And we also try to implement in the back end the second comparison, so that you can actually compare the response maps directly between teams and with the consensus as we know it. As Martin said, we will probably have another meeting in, I think, a month or 2 months with discussions internally, but we'll let you know.
Just a last question. If we have, you know, some very technical questions, whom do you want us to send them to? You or Martin, or is?
If I may answer there, Alex, because you could send emails to the core members, but back then we created a Google group actually. So it's kind of Google forum for IBSI, and the link is on the website. So I think that's the best place, because you put your very specific questions on that Google forum, and then everybody from here can also give their input. And we make sure we receive the emails when you create a new conversation, and we'll try to answer as fast as possible. I think that's the best way of doing it. Google group.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Alex. Martin, just another question about how frequent is the website with the visualization updated? So let's say we make a submission or a resubmission. Are we able to look at our comparisons fairly quickly, or is it nightly? Or
yeah, maybe if I can answer that. So currently it's basically done in real time. So as soon as you submit a new version, you reload the website, and directly the charts will be regenerated. So far this seems to work quite well. We'll see as the number of submissions increases if this might be a blocking point, but I think so far it should be okay.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, if there are no more questions or comments, I wish you a very pleasant evening, a very pleasant afternoon, a very pleasant morning, depending on where you are. We have people from all over the globe here.
That's great.
The only comment I have is a congrats for your efforts, and many thanks for the platform you have developed and the efforts you're investing in. So I'm glad to join the team, and I hope we can get good results.
We'll be inviting some other teams as well once we have some consensus on what things should look like, because it's easier to iterate a little bit with a smaller number of teams. But the plan is to also extend the invitation to other teams. So if you meet people or know people that might be interested, you can ask them. You can invite them. Yep. Good. Martin, any last words?
Thank you very much. That was great. I'm very happy about this first meeting, and I hope there will be many more. Thank you very much.
Good.
So thank you all. Thanks, and congratulations for your work again.
Thank you.
Thank you once more.
Okay.
Martin, would you be sending a link to the video to everybody?
Yeah, I'll try to put that on the main website. Yes, if that's okay for you all, I think I'll just put it on YouTube or something and put the link on the main website. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Good.
Okay. Well, bye then.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
You.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye bye.